Ngā mihi nui kia koutou. It is really good to be here. This is an announcement, or today's announcements are near and dear to my heart. I've really enjoyed the privilege of being Minister of Education over the last 3 years. I think we've made a lot of progress in education. We inherited a sector that was somewhat dispirited and in desperate need of some additional investment, and we've made a lot of progress in a lot of key areas. So if you look across school property, for example, nearly $3.5 billion of investment in school property. If you look in the areas of like learning support, almost $1 billion, just shy of $1 billion, about $930 million spent on learning support for our most vulnerable kids. And in early childhood education, some really big and significant increases of investment in early childhood education, including reinstating the 100% qualified teacher funding rate, which means that those services that employ fully qualified and registered teachers get funded for that, so they get paid an additional rate, a higher rate, so that they can support that quality workforce. So we're here today at a community-based early childhood education service because we've got one big piece of unfinished business when it comes to early childhood education teacher pay, and that's the issue of pay parity. So as a government, we've been committed to pay parity for everybody working in the state-employed sector, so kindergartens, primary schools and secondary schools, and the big collective agreement settlement that we reached extended to all of those workforces. But we know in early childhood education that pay parity is still some unfinished business that we have to attend to. So teachers who are working in community-based services like this one, private early childhood education services as well, they're not currently paid as well as the teachers working in kindergartens, and that's because the government subsidies don't allow for that. So one of the core commitments that the Labour Party is making in our next term of government is extending pay parity to all teachers working in early childhood education, making sure that they are all paid what they are worth, and at the moment they're not, and that's got to be fixed. So we've seen significant increases in funding for ECE, for quality ECE. We're now going to continue that investment and make sure all of those teachers are well paid and supported in their roles. We're also going to be continuing to invest in schooling, and the policy sets out particularly a focus on equity and making sure that our new equity funding system is implemented across the school system. And of course in tertiary education, a really big focus for us will be making sure that we implement our vocational education reforms, that we're putting trades and vocational training back on the map, and that includes free apprenticeships and free vocational training in those areas where New Zealand has skill shortage. So we'll be continuing to implement that policy, and subsidies for employers who are taking on apprentices, because we know that in the current economic climate, without that additional support, a lot of our apprentices could find that they were out of their work and unable to continue their training. So we're putting extra funding in to make sure that happens as well. So we made a lot of progress over 3 years. There's still an awful lot of work to be done, and to the manifesto that we're launching today really continues on the path that we've been on for the last 3 years. Very happy to take your questions.
Did you cancel any planned policies because of COVID?
The main change that you'll see is that we're not going ahead with the second and the third year of fees free across all tertiary education. Instead, we've redirected that funding into addressing areas where we know we have skill shortages. So we've put extra funding into free vocational education and free apprenticeships, because actually in the current economic climate, that's what's going to give us a better bang for our buck. So we're not going ahead with years 2 and 3 of the fees free.
Is that an admission that it's failed?
No, not at all, but it is an admission that it's the sort of thing you do when the economic going is good, rather than at a time when there are so many other things that we need to invest in order to keep the country moving. So we really want to tackle some of those long-term skill shortages. So if you look at building and construction and you look at our primary industries, they've been reliant a lot on an imported workforce. They're not in a position to be able to bring in those same level of skilled migrants that they have in the past. So we've got to do a better job of training our own.
Are you using COVID as an excuse for a failed policy?
No, not at all. Look, we're very happy with the way the first year fees free has travelled. It's resulted in young people taking on less debt. So if you look at the student loan burden that young people have, it's lower. They'll pay back their loans faster. And in terms of our economic recovery, all of those things matter as well, because the faster someone pays back their student loan, the faster they are getting into a position where they can be investing in other areas of their life, including things like buying a first home or starting a family.
Are years 2 or 3 of 2 and 3 of these three gone for good, or could you see it returning in another election manifesto in 2023?
Look, that would be a matter for the future. The Labour Party is absolutely committed to removing financial barriers to participation in education, and you've seen that over this term of government. The extra funding we've put into schools so that parents don't have to pay the same level of donations that they've been paying, so supposed donations. We know that they've sort of been dressed up as fees in the past. We have introduced the first year free. We've put extra money into student financial support, like increasing loans and allowances to make sure they're keeping up with the cost of living. It's something that we'd look at again in the future, but it certainly wouldn't be in the next term of government.
What about postgraduate student allowances? Are those just gone for good now?
Look, I think in the current economic climate, we're having to respond to the most immediate and pressing needs. I do acknowledge that there's still an issue there around postgraduate student support and something that we'd look at in the future, but we're not making a specific commitment on that.
Is it the current economic climate that a lot of people are losing their jobs and might want to go back to university to get a postgraduate diploma or something?
Generally speaking, the people who go back to university, go through university level study, do have really good employment outcomes out the other side of that. And actually, if you look at the things like reinstating the training incentive allowance, we are providing additional support for people to engage in tertiary study. But actually, the area where we know we've got a real problem is trades and vocational education. So our primary industries, our agricultural sector, our forestry sector, fisheries, they're crying out for skilled workers. So we're making that training free so that we can encourage more people into those areas. And similarly in building and construction.
Is there any new ideas or new policies in your manifesto today, or is it basically all an extension of things that you've launched in government?
Yeah, well, we've had a very ambitious program of work over the last 3 years, and when we kicked off the program of work when we first became government last time, I think people doubted our ability to deliver on that. We're in the midst of delivering on it. We're absolutely committed to delivering on it, and so you'll see this year's manifesto is very much a continuation of the work that we've already started.
National had a big focus on sort of teacher aids and learning support in their policy yesterday. What's Labour's plan around that?
Well, if you look at what we've already invested in, increasing Oars funded hours, so that young people who already qualify are actually getting more support. So each child gets an extra 3 hours of Oars funded support. That came with quite a hefty price tag. We've been putting extra money into counselling services and mental health support in schools because we know that makes a big difference. We have put more money into things like sign language, like English as a second language support, all of those different forms of learning support, and of course introducing the learning support coordinators, because many families will say it's not the lack of support that's the problem, it's not being able to access it, and not knowing where to go and not having that support to step you through the process. And those learning support coordinators make a big difference. And as I said before, if you add all of those things together, it's just shy of $1 billion of extra investment that we've already put into that area. So again, we're going to keep pushing, we're going to keep making sure that we're investing there. Teacher aid numbers are improving, and actually one of the big things that I'm really proud of is improving teacher aid pay. Teacher aides were some of the worst paid people in our school system, and pay equity for them has meant that they've had a really big pay boost, and that's really good news. It means that they can really focus on doing their job as well as they possibly can.
And got with the impact of COVID, do you think your plan around free lunches in schools is going to go far enough to address the need?
Free lunches in schools, rolling out to 200,000 kids is a really big step, and that's going to take a bit of work, and it's going to take quite intensive work over the next year, because that's a pretty ambitious goal. Normally, programs like that would take a lot longer to implement than the timetable that we've set out for it. So it is a big an ambitious project. We're committed to doing it because the feedback that we've had from the first round of schools who have taken part in the program is that it's made such an enormous difference to kids' learning. So what they'll say is, in the afternoon session, after lunch, they were often dealing with crowd control, if you like, behavioural problems. Now they're saying that that's actually really productive learning time for them when it wasn't previously. It's actually really created a strong bond between the teachers and the kids as well, because the teachers are the ones handing out the food, and that really helps to create that bond, particularly with those younger kids. And so, there's so many positives from food in school. So it is something we'd look to expand in the future, but obviously over the next year, getting out to that extra 200,000, or getting out to 200,000 kids is a pretty big ask.
How many kids are going hungry at school at the moment, and how will that be impacted further due to COVID, do you think?
Well, this will make an incredibly big difference to the number of kids who are going to school hungry. What we know from some of the schools that have already been involved in the initial stage of this, the prototype stage of this, is that they actually saw an increase in demand for their school breakfast program as well. So many of them were often doing breakfast programs already, but kids weren't taking them up. They weren't coming to school for breakfast. Now that they're doing lunch as well, now that the stigma of eating at school and getting a free meal at school is gone, actually kids are now getting 2 meals a day at school. They're getting a breakfast and a lunch in a lot of cases. And what that means is that they're just much healthier and they're much more engaged in their learning.
What do you say to those postgraduate students who perhaps went back to uni to retrain because of COVID and now aren't going to get that postgraduate allowance?
There is still financial support available for postgraduate students, so student loans and other forms of financial support are still available. We are targeting additional financial support to those who most can benefit from that, so the training incentive allowance that my colleague Carmel Cipollone announced, I think it was late last week, that's going to make a huge difference. It's one of those things that the last government did away with that was really short-sighted. Now's the time when we should be investing in getting people upskilled and back into work.
And what does addressing the digital divide look like?
So we've had really good success during the COVID-19 response period and starting to close that digital divide. I think when I reflect back to March and I look at what we asked the education system to do, we asked them to adopt a radically different way of learning and a way of teaching in a very short space of time, an unreasonably short space of time, and they did that exceptionally well. So I take my hat off to all of the teachers and parents who were involved in setting that up. But we know that it really amplified the digital divide. So we've focused on getting households connected that weren't previously connected. I think at last count, somewhere around about 40,000 households that didn't have internet now have internet because of the work we've done to get them connected. And tens of thousands of devices have been sent out to make sure that kids who didn't have them have access to them. So we've completed or are in the process of completing the rollout to all secondary school kids. So no secondary school kids should be going without a digital device. We've still got more work to do in the primary space. And then, of course, we've got the work to do. Those kids, doing it once doesn't solve the problem. You've then got an ongoing issue of making sure that you're maintaining connectivity and maintaining access to digital devices.
Given you now have a very large other portfolio, are you still keen to stay on as the Education Minister throughout the next term?
Look, that's a matter for the Prime Minister after the election, I'll ultimately have that conversation with her, assuming the election goes the way we want it to go.
But if I imagine your what there will have some bearing on the decision, and do you want to be Education Minister? Is this a program that you've started that you want to see through?
Look, I'm very passionate about education. I'm absolutely committed to the government's COVID-19 health response, these are all discussions that you have after an election, not before them.
And National are currently planning to outspend you on school infrastructure. It seems that they want to spend another $3.9 billion on top of the current government kind of projected spending. What do you make of that? And are you spending enough on school property?
We're spending record levels on school property. And of course, the one thing that we're not doing, though, is privatising school property. So much of their investment is not additional government expenditure. It's them saying that we're going to get the private sector to do it. And actually, we know that model costs more in the long run. So that's kicking the can down the road to future taxpayers to pay for. We've actually been really upfront. We're putting record levels of investment into school property. I think we're starting to see the dividends from that. But bear in mind that a lot of what they're promising is sort of 10 years in the future. We're focused on the here and now.
With your health spokesperson's hat on, what's the plan for Labour around children's access to dental care?
Look, we'll announce that when we announce our health policy, which is not today. We're doing education today.
But do you think now is the time to be sort of providing more financial support to people for dental care access?
Look, I'm not making announcements on dental care today, but nice try.
Just if you could say when you last went to the dentist and what your experience was like.
Pretty good. Yeah, I went to a dentist on Tinakori Road. Not so keen on the old scrubbing. It tends to hurt a little bit, but it's worth doing.
Did you ever skip a yearly checkup when you were younger? Was it so expensive?
No, actually, I was very fortunate to go to a primary school that had a dental clinic at it. And so we got regular dental checkups through the school dental clinic.
Do you think that should be brought back?
Well, nowadays, rather than investing in dental clinics at every school, we have mobile dentistry services, and actually they're amazing, and they're still providing the same level of, if not better, dentistry care to what the old school dental clinics offered. But you get the economies of scale by having them moving around schools rather than permanently stationed at schools. A lot of money used to be spent on maintaining dental clinics that didn't have a particularly high throughput, whereas the mobile clinics are a better solution.
Across the ORS funding and the infrastructure stuff, National do appear to be be outspending labour or promising to outspend labour on education. What do you make of that after kind of 9 years of promising to outspend national on education?
Oh, look, I think if you judge us by what we've delivered in terms of investment in education, and you judge the previous national government by what they delivered in education, they made a lot of big spending promises in education in 2008 as well, and they didn't deliver on any of them.
Why are you scrapping deciles?
Decile funding is a very blunt instrument. It doesn't target need, so it looks at the overall socioeconomic makeup of a neighbourhood, but kids can come from a variety of different backgrounds and have a variety of different challenges outside the school gate. So we've got to move to something a bit more sophisticated than just looking at the overall makeup of a neighbourhood, to looking at what's the background of each of the individual kids that are going to that school, and how can we make sure that we're providing additional support to those schools who are grappling with that. So if you look at some of the higher decile schools, for example, they'll often have a significant number of kids who are coming from quite disadvantaged backgrounds, but they're not getting that additional funding to support them. So the barrier to moving more quickly in this area has been that we don't want to see some schools gain a lot of extra money and some schools lose a lot of money. So we have to put extra money in to smooth that transition so that no schools lose out significantly from the change.
And isn't there a challenge of students leaving school to go into work, and perhaps their family's been thrown into poverty, and so they're doing that to help? What's in this to help keep those students in school?
So we've put a lot of additional financial support into families who are experiencing the pinch from COVID-19. So if you look at the COVID income relief payments for those who have recently lost their jobs, of course the job seeker payment is available. There's a variety of hardship support available to families who are in hardship. Not all kids will stay at school until the very end of year 13. That's never been the case. So some kids actually want to get out and get on the job and learn on the job. So they want to do apprenticeships, or they want to do applied education and training rather than staying at school. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but my message to those kids and to their families is to get into a pathway that leads to a stepping up as you progress through your working life, rather than something that just sort of stops you on a low income for life. So getting into an apprenticeship is actually a good thing for a young person to do if they want to get on the job sooner.
On the postgraduate student allowances, you made that promise in 2017. Obviously, COVID did come along in 2020. We were set, now you have this economic excuse, but you didn't have it for 2 years. We were essentially one of the officials who made the argument that you've made today, that because people make more money after postgraduate study, it's not really needed. Is that what's actually changed your mind on this?
No, I mean, other spending priorities have reordered things during the 3-year term. So if you look, for example, at the teacher pay settlement, that was a multi-billion-dollar pay settlement that we had to meet in the middle of the term, and we had not intended to spend that much on teacher pay. Good on the teachers, they got that, they fought for that and they got it, and they deserve it as well. But it did push some things to our 3rd year rather than our 2nd year or our 1st year. So if you look at the 100% qualified band for early childhood educators, that was sort of, I'd hoped to get that in the 2nd budget. We ended up getting it in the 3rd budget. And then some stuff just didn't make it in the 3rd budget because of COVID-19.
Has COVID-19 affected Labour Party Te Reo Māori?
No, absolutely not. I mean, if you look at the investment that we've had in Te Reo Māori, if anything, we've ramped it up as a result of COVID-19. We've been training over 1,000, I think it might even be getting up towards 2,000 additional Te Reo Māori teachers during the time that we've been in government. We know that that's one of the biggest constraints to delivering Te Reo Māori is having fluent Te Reo Māori teachers in our schools. So we've really ramped up the efforts to train more teachers in that area. A lot of additional curriculum resourcing has been developed. So again, you've got to have the books and you've got to have all the materials for teachers to use. I've been really open about this. I would have loved to have learned Te Reo Māori when I was at school, and I'm really disappointed that I didn't have that opportunity. It sits on my bucket list of things that I'd like to do when I get the opportunity to do it, and I'm embarrassed to say that I have not made any progress in that area. But I do think it's important. It's one of the things that makes us unique as a country. It is our first language, and we should absolutely be investing in it.
Just one more, sorry.
Yep.
How many people linked to education programs, including teachers or students, have been told to self-isolate as a result of the nurse who visited that Auckland gym?
Look, I haven't got that exact number. Many of the gym contacts will be casual contacts rather than close contacts, so they'll be at lower risk. But when the health briefing's done later on, that would be a question for them, for the health team who are leading that. I just don't have that material with me for the education announcement. All right, thanks everybody. Very good.